First principles thinking, trust, and open communication. That's how Turntide is solving super hard problems to make every watt worthwhile for humanity and keep fossil fuels underground, where they belong.
Welcome, everybody, to T-Rex Radio and Video. I'm joined today by Senia Maymin, who is the Chief People Officer at Turntide, and she has she's been with the company now for a bit and is definitely making her presence known and definitely leaving a very positive mark on the culture. So thank you, Senia, for joining us.
Totally a pleasure. And Paul, when I was first interviewing with Turntide, this would be just under 3 months ago, one of the biggest things I did to get a sense of the culture and the people is to listen to your podcast. So it's really exciting to be on one of them now.
You certainly hail from some of the most elite academic institutions that we have available to us. And the stuff that you studied, I've also found really fascinating as well. So for our listeners, the whole positive psychology movement under Martin Seligman at Penn, I think Senia was a student of, and then later a practitioner of, through some of her coaching practice as well. So I'm curious, like maybe we'll start there for fun, and tell me a little bit about how the positive psychology movement, and then what you've learned, directly from people like Marty Seligman.
I'd love to. And to your comment about having gone to these amazing schools, it's been incredible to go there. But I also have to tell you what my good friend from high school says to me. Senia, did you really need all that schooling and all that education? So, I have enough friends that keep me sane. And it's funny too, Paul, because you and I have talked about it. Paul and I have a big love of reading and of exploring things and ideas in books. And in fact, even the school that I went to at Harvard, it was math and econ. Then I went to work at Morgan Stanley Asset Management. So right away I went to finance and never expected I would be in tech or in a people related field or executive coaching. And then eventually it was business school at Stanford. But then I still see Marty Seligman sometimes at conferences or on large Zooms. And if I ever have a chance to be with him, together, we were in a small classroom, about, I think, 32 to 35 people in our Masters of Applied Positive Psychology at UPenn. I regularly say to him that he changed my life. You go into this program, it's a 1-year program at Penn in a field that wasn't mine. I was working at a hedge fund at the time in investor relations. And you learn these things about how people make change and behavior change and how people are motivated, teams are motivated, organizations. That made me go on to do my PhD work. To your point about positive psychology, I'm such a huge fan. And I'll just add right from the beginning, positive psychology is not positive thinking. Those are two very, very different things. Positive thinking can be great. It depends. Sometimes realistic thinking is great. I don't know if I've ever talked with you about this, Paul. I think about the field of positive psychology. That's actually a field within psych. I think of it actually as change psychology. It studies how we make change, whether it's big things like setting goals or routines, habits, or even how we make changes in our emotions or in our strengths. I think of it as change psychology, which is very appealing to me. It's very interesting to study and to explore. And like you said, be a practitioner of actually coach people on, see how that works.
Like what I love about people like yourself is that you don't stop at the theory, right? Like you actually, and you've got a culture. I'm sorry, you've got a coaching practice to prove it. Where you put these things into practice. So maybe you could comment a little bit more on that, about the practical aspects of the lessons and the change.
I will, and you didn't ask me about this specifically, but I'll bring it up because it's relevant. So I went through this Master of Applied Positive Psychology program in 2006. And after that, I became an executive coach and then launched a coaching practice. And we could talk about that separately. But a coaching company, we've had 83 coaches at that company. That was the company that I ran before coming to join Turntide. And it's so critical that we don't get stuck on things that may not be always the same. So there could be a research right now, we're in 2021, Paul, there could be a research study that you and I read and we think this is amazing. And in 2022, it could be reversed with 5 other studies that reverse it. So that's valuable. I actually don't think that's bad or a mistake. I think that's the process of research and science. And so the detail that I want to add here, you know this, but I'll share this with the people who are with us today. After I finished that master's program and I started doing executive coaching work, which again was a 180-degree turn for me from investor relations, from working in high tech, in business development. So complete turn to thinking about executive coaching. A really close colleague of mine, Margaret Greenberg, and I, we noticed that in coaching, we were using the same about 12 to 24 models often with our coaching clients. And I'll just give you an example if people want to Google it. One possible model is the flow model, which is sort of skills and challenges on an XY axis. That's a model. But we would use that with people when they said, hey, one of my team members is stuck, or one of my team members isn't motivated. So all of that is background to say that Margaret and I got together. We realized that we were using similar things with the executives we were coaching. And we sat back, we took, gosh, I won't even admit how long it took us to do this, but on the back burner, in addition to running our Nia coaching practice and doing my PhD program, and Margaret a coaching and consulting practice, we wrote a book. Took us many years. So I'm going to show you the book. I have it on my desk. Our book is Profit from the Positive. That's by Margaret and by me. And it's 31 tools that managers, leaders, individual contributors can use. We have one of those studies in our book, Paul. We have one of those studies that then was later on unproven. And so we wrote a blog post, and that's just part of science, going through and making the steps that it needs to make, which isn't bad. It's reality, it's life. People change, the research changes. How we didn't used to do big data research. Scientists never even did that until I think the past decade or so. So it's all good, but it can be confusing to the lay reader, who I am when I'm not deep into an article, to the lay reader who sees it in one New York Times article and sees the opposite in a Wall Street Journal article a couple of months later.
Yeah, I sort of, as I'm listening to you, I have kind of a Venn diagram in my head, which is like, what do the academics papers say as sort of one circle? What do the practitioners find useful and that produces real world results as another circle? And then there's yet another circle, which is what appeals to people. What sort of draws people and gets them excited. And I know in your dissertation, I think you called them flimsy frameworks. And a flimsy framework is one that works despite the fact that, let me know if I get this right, but works despite the fact that people don't think it will. Or do I have that opposite?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Like so much comes down to the framing, like the Dick Thaylors and Cass Sunsteins of the world that are sort of nudging us to these behaviors by presenting information in a more salient way, or in a way that might better resonate and so forth. And so I'm curious how that's affected your work as well, just in terms of the actual presentation of choices and behavior change.
I'll answer that in two ways. I'll answer that from my background of coaching CEOs and senior level execs, and also from something that you and I love in common, which is storytelling. So I'll kind of give two perspectives on framing. One is, it's almost all of us have places where we're confident, and all of us have places where we are less confident. It's kind of a tautology, nothing new there. In my previous life before Turntide, I coached executives, CEOs of large multi-billion-dollar companies. I'm only saying that for context to say that the people who run large companies are the same as you and I and everybody, which is they feel confident in some areas and they feel less confident in others. And sometimes, and this is actually an unpopular word in executive coaching, but sometimes one of the things that we do in working with someone over, let's say, a 6-month, 9-month period on a large overarching goal that they have, for example, to be more visionary, or to be more strategic, or to be more responsive, more inclusive, whatever that might be. In one of those kinds of situations of work, we don't always know which things will work. So we try experiments. And in experiments, part of the things that happen in experiments is a lot of framing. And this is the word that's a little unpopular in coaching, and role playing. I actually love role playing with the execs that I work with. So they might say, I'm about to have a difficult conversation with somebody, and we'll role play that. I'll be that person on the other side of the difficult conversation. And it almost sounds like a child's game, but it's just getting that I don't want to say that it's always a confidence thing, but it's getting that practice. I'm a big fan, and you probably know this already, Paul, of practice and habits. It's getting that practice so that you are comfortable in that conversation when you have it. So that's one way of framing, which is framing it specifically to the thing that you're about to face. There's a researcher in Europe, her name is Hermione, I think that's how you pronounce it, Hermina Ibarra, and she researches a lot the idea of dabbling in something before you even know it. So a lot of people will say, I want to stop being a lawyer, I want to be a musician, and they'll just cold turkey quit. No, her research shows is dabble, run that side hustle, run that parallel process. And then when you go, you've really gone. So all that to say that you can actually experiment. You can do those things. I'm such a fan of that, of experimenting, of trying things out like that.
I'm really surprised that within the coaching community, it's the notion of role playing is considered a dirty word or not, out of vogue. So I've done a lot of work in sales training, particularly with frontline sales managers, the people who work directly with the reps in the fields that are interacting directly with customers. So sort of that first line of management, and the most effective frontline managers, like far and away, disproportionately role play. They're constantly just dropping into role play scenarios where they'll be coaching a rep, and the rep will say, I encountered this situation, and they'll say something in the abstract, and then the frontline manager will say, well, no, tell me more specifically, where were you? And then they'll describe the interaction that was happening, and then they'll suddenly jump in to that role and say, okay, let's play this out. It's like, I once heard this expression, it's called future memory, which is that like you develop a memory of the future by acting things out in the present through role playing, so that when you actually find yourself in that scenario, you've practiced, right? Like, and it doesn't always go like, no plant survives contact with others, but still, like you kind of have that memory, and you've worked through a lot that you don't have to work through in the moment by virtue of that role playing.
And I have not heard of the term future memory, but to me, it feels almost like muscle memory about the conversations that you might be having.
Maybe I'll put you on the spot a little bit with this question, but as you've come on, like you and a number of other C-level executives have all joined at about the same time, right? Like, I mean, it's sort of the executive team was like, the composition of the executive team was very, very different a year ago. And, we now have people on, like we have seasoned expertise that we never had before, and we've got this group of leaders that are, sort of starting to gel as a team and working together. I'm curious, one of the things that you mentioned earlier was, we look at CEOs and we look at executives, and, they exude this confidence, and we think that they're bulletproof in all facets. And then we find that there are areas, just like the rest of us, where they're not as confident and they don't feel like they're as on a strong, secure footing. How that's maybe played out with your peers at Turntide in terms of, each of you bringing different strengths and weaknesses, and then working together with openness and vulnerability, and then trust.
Oh, I love that question, Paul. I think we're doing really well. And it's sort of one of those knock on wood. And you're right, it's about half of the C staff joined at about 2.5, 3 months ago or less. And Ryan, our CEO, jokes about it that he's a big fan of bringing on just-in-time management. So I love that. Here's an example that I think, for me, specifically addresses what you just asked. We were in a meeting, most of the C staff, I think, and one of the people brought up an issue that's going on just in the business, something that's going on. And the first comment that someone else made was, thank you. Now that you've brought it up, it's no longer your issue, it's our issue. Let's all figure it out. Let's have deeper dives. Let's bring the right things to the table, whether it's more our team or we also work externally. And that is exactly the vibe we want. It fits with our values. It fits with our agreements. It's somebody is bringing something to the table so that we all know and we all figure it out. And the first response is, now we're all on it. Now we're going to help. I love it.
I love that example as well. Because you can think of the counter example, right? Which is a blame-oriented culture, right? Which like that people would be reluctant to make that kind of move for fear of repercussion. Whereas like in the Turntide environment, particularly amongst the executive team, doing that is rewarded and thanked, both with words as well as then subsequent engagement and figuring it out.
And also bringing it as a collaborative, what else should I do? Just even asking for that advice, which is a wonderful thing to see.
I think what I'm hearing from you is that within our culture, it should be an instinctive response to act for help. Like we don't have to ask for help. Sorry, we don't have to fix everything ourselves. So let's talk about storytelling.
Oh, so you had asked the question of, hey, framing, is it important? Yes, framing is critically important. And I had told you, certainly executives use framing in just improving. And then we talked about the sales, how you've seen it in sales and role playing in sales. Here's how framing, I think, is so cool in storytelling. So actually, even for our tide turners or for others who are listening, I think it's going to be fun if they walk away and then they know this, and you might know this, Paul. It's a framework for storytelling. It's called the SARI framework. And the way to remember it is you will be sorry if you don't use the SARI framework. And it stands for situation, action, result, interesting thing. So here's what I think that's really cool about framing. If you use framing, a lot of times what you're saying can be more effective. So I can describe the same problem or situation by using framing. So with this particular SARI, situation, action, result, interesting thing framework, I won't, so if you ask me, what do? I can say, I'm the chief people officer of Turntide. That doesn't really tell you very much. It tells you, oh, she's generally in the people in the HR group. But if I tell you, hey, the situation is that our people want better benefits, and they're actually a little bit sick of this one particular aspect of dealing with one vendor. And we got together as a team, as the people team, and we put our heads together and we said, this is not working, even though we like this vendor, but this isn't working. And then we figured it out. And then we came back to them and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. We checked with our CFO, that worked, and we brought them a solution. And because of that, not only are we getting more people applying to Turntide because they like that we are on par with what they're expecting, but we're also getting the people at Turntide really excited about that they asked for something and we got together as a people team and we resolved it. What I've just done is I haven't told you like I'm in the people group, but what I've told you is here's a problem. That was the situation. These are the actions we took. Here was the result. And the interesting thing is it helps attract better candidates, something that's not even related. I love that framing of the SARI story. I love it because it does exactly what you just asked me about, Paul, which is what about framing? You've got to frame the problem sometimes before you can give somebody the solution.
It's interesting. It's like one of the things that I learned when I started studying design is the importance of constraints. And we tend to think of constraints as these things that restrict us. But any outlier in a creative endeavor will tell you that constraints are your best friends. And I remember to give you an example, my wife and I, we lived in Europe with our family for a few years. And when we moved back, we were looking to buy a new home and we had some lead time on when we were moving back. And so we decided that we were going to buy land and build our own place, which thankfully we didn't do. But when we hired an architect and we were looking at different properties, anytime you had a property that, like the land wasn't level and there was some like weird geographical artifact, or there was something like, that kind of limited or constricted what we could do with it, our architect just lit up and got excited, right? Because like that's when he could get in his zone of creativity and do some really cool stuff. Like he didn't want a blank slate. If you don't have that constraint, the sky's the limit. And there's so many other different options that you could come up with, but you don't have that constraint. And what you were describing from a framing perspective is that framework then constrains the thinking, but in a positive way. It brings structure to it. It brings focus to it. And the nice thing about that is like, you don't just need a single framework. Like you can bring lots of different frames to lots of different problems. And, like one of the things that Gary Roberts was sharing with me is he applied Ed DeBono's 6 thinking hats method. And I've always loved that as well. It's like, you're just asking people to wear a different hat, right? So right now you're the guy that agrees with everything. Right now you're the guy that cuts everything down at the knees. And it's like, the other thing about this, and this maybe brings us full circle to role playing as well, is that the other thing that's really cool about that is it gives people permission, and it also helps to minimize the emotional intensity, right? Because it's like, if like you're adopting a particular hat, like I'm assuming this perspective right now, I'm going to play this role, then you kind of externalize the presentation of that perspective. And it removes any personal feelings from it. I'm not saying, hey, Senia, I disagree with you and that's a really bad idea, like we might do in an argument. Instead, I'm saying, well, right now I'm going to wear the skeptic hat, and the skeptic would say the following kinds of things, and it removes a lot of the negative emotion from the exploration of things that are uncertain.
And just think about part of what you're doing, Paul. You're playing when you put on that hat. In a way, you're playing. And I would even say for the tide turners that are listening to us right now, it might be a fun thing to do at the start of a meeting is give some people roles. You're the naysayer. You have to find all the critical things, the things that aren't working. You're the supporter, and you're maybe the timekeeper or something else. I don't know, but you can make up those roles. And then everybody's involved. You're on. Like, you're on in that meeting. You have to be thinking.
Totally. And I love that you brought up play. It's sort of like, because I think a lot about what like how we perform in an environment of positive and negative emotion, and there is absolutely a time to manage with negative emotion, right? Like, if you've got a burning ship and something needs to be fixed, you need to point to the fire, and it's not going to feel good, in terms of going about fixing that. And we have those kinds of problems at Turntide. Like, we have problems with our supply chain. We've had problems with installation quality. We've had like sort of a number of different issues that have required kind of a focus on the problem and pointing directly to it in a problem-solving way. But that's the opposite of play, right? Like for every one of like these problems that we have to fix that is specific, we have these areas that we need to explore, like these new opportunities. And when you're exploring new opportunities, you're playing, right? Like you're celebrating failure and having fun, right? Like, and that's what drives creativity. And I think they're both necessary, right? It's like, back to your point around frame, like which of those two frames you bring, it should be suited to the problem at hand.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit like Marty Seligman in many of his talks. He will say, optimism is great. It's an explanatory style for if something bad happens, you're going to say, this is not going to happen all the time. It doesn't happen only to me, and it's not going to happen with everything that I do. So that's great. But there are some people whom you would like to have a pessimistic explanatory style and dig deeper. Like he always says, my pilot, if I'm flying, I would like my pilot to be a pessimist.
So, Senia, let's look forward a little bit, right? Like, so we've talked a little bit about your past and some of your background. We've talked a little bit about, your integration with the executive team that's sort of forming and coming together along Turntide values. Looking forward, what excites you most about what you're doing at Turntide, and what are some of the things that, and we don't have to do all Kool-Aid drinking. What are some of the things that you're looking to put into place? What are some of the things that you think need to be improved? And what are some of the things about the vision that excite you?
That's so much. It's good. It's good. One of the biggest reasons that I joined Turntide is because the vision excites me. And I also love that I can explain it to my family and to friends, that I can say, hey, those HVACs in big buildings, well, wouldn't it be amazing if actually the electricity cost of that was cut in half? And if the electricity cost is half of your cost of running a building, like how cool would that be? So that's good for the business. That's good for the environment. So I love that it's very clear. I'll even tell you, my 6-year-old son has been on a Zoom with me when we watched one of our folks, Tracy, install a rooftop unit into an HVAC. And that was so cool for him to see. Like, not only am I talking about these motors and motor operating systems, but here it is happening. So first of all, just that. And I'll even add, because you and I both know him, but Ryan's really good at that vision. He's really good at, this is the big picture. This is why it's important. This is why it's hard. It's because it's hard that we're going to be able to do it with our incredible people. So I love that. I wouldn't even say that feels like a challenge to me. It does, but it feels very motivating. It feels very forward looking. So that I'm very excited about. So the next thing is, you've asked me both today and previously when we were talking about this, what's surprising, Senia, and then what does the future look like? So I'll start with what's surprising. Paul, you and I have talked about this. I love our 5 values and our 5 behavioral agreements. But it's not just that I like them as concepts, I like how they get used. I really like that in a decision-making framework, when a couple of people are in a meeting or a group, hey, we're going to do this because it fits. It fits because we're creating sustainable value, or it fits because we're building trust with our customer, whatever it may be. So I really love pulling that in. I would add that there's something, and I've talked about this with a person whom you know in the people group with Victoria Sevilla, there's something that we've been hearing that I don't know if you might have some thoughts on this, Paul. I don't know if it's tied to a value or kind of an overall value, but there's this thing that I've been hearing consistently since I've been here, which is this idea of one team. And actually, now that I mention it, it's exactly that example that I gave you with the exec team. The C staff were together. Here's a problem. Now it's all of our problem. Let's get to it. But it's not just that. It's when people are brainstorming in a meeting, oh, we will move this forward regardless. This is product. This is sales. It doesn't matter. We're going to figure this out as an integrated piece. That's been awesome to see, because Paul, you and I know big organizations, and how many times in big organizations have we heard the complaint, things are siloed, things are over here or over there, we can't get people together. And here, your problem, mi casa, su casa, like we are here, we are figuring out the same problem. Well, do you feel that? Because you know the culture of Turntide. What's your response to that?
I do. I do feel that, and I have anxiety about it as well, because I think it's something that's really special, but it's something that can easily be lost with scale, right? So when we scale groups of people working together, the approach that we take, like the proven industrial approach that we've taken to do that is hierarchy. Where you have like an organizational structure where you put people into groups where they specialize, and we call these groups divisions. Right? Like that's a very telling word, right? These are the divisions of the company. It's the way that we're divided.
I see what you're saying.
I think that's very telling, right? Like, and what you're describing is something different. And it's something that I truly believe Turntide has, and that, in all of our day-to-day actions, we need to keep that front of mind and be constantly, mindful of thinking in terms of we. As opposed to like you guys versus us. And we're going to need specialization, particularly as we tackle thorny, complicated problems. I mean, like we're signing up for solving some of the hardest problems, and you solve the hardest problems by bringing in people with the deepest expertise, and expertise is like necessarily specialized, right? And so getting cross-functional expertise to work together is a really hard thing.
Totally agree. That what you just said leads me to my thinking of what is a challenge, but also something we can overcome in the future. And I'll kind of break it down into two things. I'm gonna brag a little on the people team. The people team is great. It's so strong. It's so great. And it's been wonderful just to see what we can support in terms of Turntide growing. So that's one thing. And the second thing that I'm looking forward to, which may be a challenge, just like you've said, our culture is strong and our one teamness is strong. For our viewers who are with us, this is drum practice in the background. So this is a perfect example of Zoom and all of us working from home, and here we all are. So one of the kids is drum practicing in the background. But the second thing, and I know you've just had Marty and Mike Franco on in terms of Riptide. So Riptide is a company that we have welcomed in and brought on, and they've added so much to Turntide. It's actually one of the parts of Turntide that I'm really excited about, what Riptide does with the operating system. But what I want to say is this was an integration. This was an integration of bringing people on who are invaluable. They're ridiculously meaningful and valuable and bring so much to Turntide. And so I hope that similarly, as we hire people, as people come on, that it will be similar to what's happened with Riptide, which is, I mean, you're nodding because you can feel it. It's tangible, Paul. It's the kind of thing that you say, hey, we're a little concerned what may happen in the culture in the future, but we have had a really good example where it's happened in a positive way. Now those folks are saying the same values that we are. They may have had similar values. We've just put names to it. And it just feels right. You know when things feel right. So that's an example.
Yeah, I really love that. And by the way, I couldn't agree more. When Turntide does corporate development work and we have mergers and acquisitions along these lines, I think the upfront diligence of ensuring cultural fit is huge, and it's crucial, and it's a selection criteria.
Completely agree. It's something for us to look out for, and at the same time to celebrate as it's working out.
Amen. Well, any more closing thoughts before we wrap up, Senia?
was fun. I enjoy listening to your podcast. It's very fun to be on one. This is fun. I'm really glad that both what you and I are doing in discussing all of these different ideas, and what happens a lot at Turntide in discussing ideas is just so it feels very alive. It feels very fun to think about ideas, think about which ideas and what concepts fit with us, which don't. You mentioned earlier, my PhD thesis advisor was Chip Heath, which was such an amazing experience because every single phone call as a PhD student that I would have with him, I feel that I'm growing, I'm opening up a door to thinking about things in a different way. And I want to make that parallel because I feel that Turntide is super open to that. What are people thinking? Oh, have we considered this? Have we thought about this? Can we jump a little bit here? Then do we go back? And that makes it fun and alive.